So let's get going. It's coming up to 4 o'clock. As always, we have Sonia Dougal with us today. And for those of you who have not been on our previous webinars, Sonia is well versed in the field of education. She has over 2 decades of experience in the field. Sonia herself is a published author and has developed a wide array of educational content, mainly in the areas of English, EVS, and value education. For a whole host of leading publishing houses, including Burlington and different education bodies. Sonia is also a curriculum and content developer and teaches English as a second language herself, particularly in the areas of general spoken and business English. And the good thing for us is she does it for a wide age group of students. So there's lots of insights that we can gain from Sonia in that respect. 2 particular areas of interest for Sonia are storytelling and writing, which leads us nicely, I think, into today's session, where we'll be covering the choosing of appropriate stories for kids. So just before I hand over to Sonia, just a couple of housekeeping rules. Please don't raise your hand. There are hundreds of people on this webinar. We won't be able to unmute anybody and deal with specifics for individuals there. If you do have a question, please put it on the question and answer, because as the webinar progresses, Sonia will be asking you to put various things in the chat. And so questions often get lost there. And we have time towards the end, and we will be addressing a couple of those questions as well. Okay, so Sonia, over to you. Take it away. What have you got planned for us today?
Thank you, Kalpesh. Cal, this is such a nice time. It's raining outside, it's very cold, and it's time for, as we say, pakoras and stories, right? That's how I remember my childhood. So the first story I remember my father telling me was The Lion and the Rabbit. So there's this very clever rabbit who's going to be eaten by the lion. And he protects himself by saying that there's another lion, and the lion foolishly looks into the well and jumps, thinking that's the lion because he looks at its own reflection at the time. Right. So, which one is yours, Cal?
That's interesting. I can't remember my father reading any of those types of things, but I remember as a young kid, I used to cycle down to where my grandmother lived, which was near the center of a city. And I used to park the bike and go to the library. So the first book I remember was one called The Black Mercedes. And the only reason I got it was the cover. It had a black Mercedes. This must have been the early 70s. And it turned out into a crime type thriller for kids. So that got me hooked on that genre of stories, to be honest. But that's the first one I remember.
That's interesting. What about you people? If you have any favorite, I read one, The Thirsty Crow. Yes, that was a very, very clever story. If you see, the crow had some critical thinking going on there and problem solving skills, because it could figure out how to get the water up. Any other stories? I think
I want to just put The Little Prince. So that's an interesting
the clever fox. Yeah. Okay. The Lion and the Mouse. So if we see, we are just bending towards Panchatantra and Cinderella. Yes. Yeah, interestingly, Cinderella was my favorite because I still remember the blue board cover I had as a kid. And I used to just go and fantasize and imagine the world out there. So yes, that's been one of those. So
I think a lot of people remember the fairy tales, don't they? And,
absolutely.
What you did as a kid.
Absolutely. So today what we are going to do is stories have become, we are talking about stories, but it came naturally when we were young, wasn't it? So now we need to understand that stories play an extremely important role when it comes to child's emotional, cognitive, and social development. So that is what we are going to talk about. Then how to select age-appropriate and interest-driven books for our children. Next, stories can be fun, they can be educational. Sometimes you don't have to have a moral because there's so much going, whether it's Cinderella story or the Lion and the Rabbit or the Thirsty Crow. So there are a lot of life skills which are coming through. So right now, what we are going to talk about today is all those things and much more of it. And every time, I do not see that every story has to end with a moral or just one moral for that matter. Children are open to their own interpretations as we go forward. Um, Very important is I was at a very big forum where the parents were there end of December, and they said that story should be not extra curriculum but core curriculum. So it should be part of the curriculum because the reading culture is dying. We have to get it back, isn't it? So that's what we are going to talk about as we go forward. But why read? I mean, we've all spoken about stories and all, but why should we read? Any ideas? You can just start typing in. Would love to know what your ideas of reading are. Why should we read?
I think it also depends on different ages, doesn't it? You read for the purpose when you're younger, maybe a different one as you get older. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
people putting increase in vocabulary, Sonia.
Yeah,
Um,
so that comes under cognitive development, right? Language learning, communication skills,
Another one is called
vocabulary,
creativity, critical thinking,
reading
emotional
and
development.
writing. Yeah. Okay. Imagination, of course. Yes, imagination. Right. Language learning. So we are reading your comments and just waiting for you to kind of, and then I'll just come back. Creative thinking. Yes, of course.
An interesting one
Entertainment.
about culture and places to learn about different cultures and places outside your own sphere. That was an interesting one.
So, okay, listening skills, storytelling, yes, listening skills, reading, of course, it's more of just reading, okay? So, why we read? It's emotional growth. It encourages empathy. We understand different characters in a story and we learn about different kinds of people, how they think, their point of view. So, there's a lot of empathy and understanding of characters' feelings. It leads to lot of emotional growth. Children or even us adults also learn how to be resilient and self-aware through these stories. For example, there's this story called The Giving Tree, where the tree does many things for the man. And there's a lot of empathy and there's a lot of things we understand selflessness in that the way the tree does things. Then, of course, cognitive development. When we talk about cognitive development, of course, expanding vocabulary, language skills, it doesn't stop there. We are talking about 21st century skills so much. So, when we talk about 21st century skills, we are talking about critical thinking, we are talking about communication, we are talking about collaboration. And that also comes through stories. Critical thinking is as simple as sequencing a story to comparing two stories or problem solving, which happens in mostly all stories. So, cognitive development is also there, plus imagination and creativity. We also learn social skill, how to collaborate, how to work together. Somebody you just mentioned about diverse cultures and perspectives. That comes through stories, isn't it? We collaborate, communicate, understand characters, understand point of view. It leads to understanding how people behave in a society. So, a lot of social skills are developed through these stories. One very important thing which I've realized over the years is, and also right now, which is a very burning hot topic, is mental health benefits. So again, from the same forum, there was a grandparent, and he says that we come from the generation of silent readers. So we used to sit in a corner and keep reading stories. And I was telling Mr. Cal that he used to hide the books, and that is something I remember in the textbooks to read one good story So that's how important it was. I come from the mountains. We didn't have people around. We didn't, have television also at that time. So for us, it was extremely important to read. So it absolutely helped us with our mental well-being. And that's true for today also. As if you have the understanding through the stories, all that just falls in place. Life skills, absolutely. Curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, all that leads to confidence, cooperation, citizenship. So, all that is our life skills, which actually come from stories. So, again, coming to it should be the core curriculum when we come to stories, isn't it? It's just coming back to that. And of course, there's something somebody did mention. It's entertainment, it's fun, it's joy. We are transported to different worlds. And of course, that also helps in our mental well-being because sometimes you are very stressed thinking about something and then you imaginatively go into Harry Potter's world or even a Cinderella world. It's so fantastic, isn't it? So stories become extremely important for us. But the problem is how to choose the right story. Does it matter? What do you think? If you have anything to say, how do you choose the right story? What should it be based on? You can again go on and type. We'll wait for your comments to come in if you have any ideas there. How to choose the right story? And does it matter?
I think the answers coming in so far, Sonia, are age appropriacy, interest, and the genre.
Absolutely. So the first thing is there has to be an emotional connection to the story. The stories need to be relatable. The children need to understand. So if we talk about small children's story, of course we are going to come to that in a while. But what is extremely important, the child has to relate to those stories. That's very important. For example, if I'm talking about friendship and middle age group, like 10-year, 11-year-old children. So Charlotte's Web, that's another very nice book which children can relate with. Then it helps emotional growth and resilience. It also provides a very safe outlet to explore complex emotions like fear, joy, or sadness. Cognitive engagement. So there's critical thinking happening. For example, there's a story, How to Weigh an Elephant. So it's very interesting. That story can be taken with for a small age group as well as middle school, where we are teaching Archimedes principles. So here we are teaching a subject or a science through a story. So the story goes something like this: that the king wants to weigh the elephant, and there's no way you can weigh the elephant. If you have any ideas, please just type in. So what he does is he makes a lot of announcements, and there's this little girl called Leelavati, and she comes and she says, "Well, I can help you with the elephant." So what she does is she takes the elephant to the water river and asks the king's men to put the mm, uh, elephant in a boat. So what would happen? The boat started to sink. So, but it doesn't sink, it only sinks that much and no more. And she says, make a cross there and let the elephant come out. And then fill in with the pebbles, and then we can weigh the pebbles. So it's problem solving, critical thinking. All that is coming through a small story. And it also talks about Archimedes principle. Teachers who are there, who are teachers, you would understand. Stories are very important. They stick to you for a lifetime. So, whatever stories I have read or you would have read as kids would stick to you even today. So, stories is a very important mode to promote critical thinking, creativity, curiosity in children. Going forward, it also leads to social development, teamwork, cooperation. There are many stories which are just based on that. The Jungle Book story is there, which talks about Mowgli who faces challenges. So there's a lot of critical thinking which comes there. So, Little Women, a story which talks about diversity, family values. So, all that is part of social development. So, it inspires positive behavior through role modeling and also gives diverse perspectives, encourages open mindedness and an understanding. There's one more story which is based in Afghanistan. I was sharing the other day with, again, I was talking to Cal about it. And there's a story about a person who's wearing a turban and they are traveling through Afghanistan. And we already have ideas there in our mind. And the man knocks at the door and he's saying, Adviya, Adviya, Adviya. And they don't open because they're scared and they don't understand the language. And what they see is not what, there's already a preconceived notion out there. And later they realize it, the man was asking for medicine because somebody was sick in the family. So what is happening here is that um, we understand diverse perspectives. Also, we need to understand that we are not going to box people in. It opens our minds and understanding to so many things. So, if our children are exposed to this kind of literature, it's so fantastic for them. They'll have such an open mind out there. As I all mentioned earlier, mental health. Absolutely. I was just reading a story about this girl who gets angry all the time and she doesn't know what to do. And then finally, she goes out into the nature and she sees the birds and she climbs the tree and nature. And she comes back home and she's more relaxed. So, telling children such stories, exposing them to such books, absolutely helps children cope with anxiety, loss. So, there are a lot of stories which do help in mental health support these days, and especially now because um, we are not talking as much because there's this thing that parents don't have time for their children, isn't it? So the more children are, they spend time with a book is a better idea than spend time on digital, isn't it? So that all that really helps. Mm, we need the earlier we introduce stories, it will build a lifelong reading habit. And it will make reading both enjoyable and educational. So it's very important that we choose the right story depending on the child's age, which I'm going to talk further. But before we go, and of course, now if a child is alone and, when parents are working, so what better thing but a book? That's what they say. A book is a child's best friend. So it also encourages independence in children. Okay. So this is a story which I actually picked up from our English reader, 21st century English reader, Burlington's series. When will Amma be back? I wonder how many of you, it's a beautiful story about a girl, Roja, whose Amma goes out to work every day and she waits for her to return. And this tells us the story of Roja and how she waits for her mother. I'm going to read it out with pictures here. All right. The book is a reader, it's part of the book. It has been written for a different set. This is an abridged version like that. So Roja is sad. Amma is going to work. I will be back before bedtime, Kanamma, says Amma. But at what time? Asks Roja. At exactly 9 o'clock tonight, replies Amma. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 6 o'clock in the morning. I want Amma to give me milk. Not you, says Roja to Appa. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 8 o'clock in the morning. Let's buy potatoes, Tata, says Roja. But we had potatoes just yesterday. How about brinjal? Today, Tata asked. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. Party, let's eat. Tata is making papadam, Roja yells. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Honk, honk. Roja's Akka is back from school. Pati says, I will go to school with you after this summer. Won't that be fun, Akka? Says Roja excitedly. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's time to go home, Roja. Appa calls out. Just one last time, shouts Roja. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 5 o'clock in the evening. Selvi, eat your dosai quickly. Only then will you become big and strong, says Roja. Tick tock, tick tock. It is 7 o'clock at night. And so, when the cap seller threw down his cap, the monkeys threw their caps down too. The time for stories, right? Papa's telling stories there. Amma! Roja shouts. What did you do all day, Roja? Amma asks. Tick tock, tick tock. It is almost 9 o'clock at night. Did you enjoy this story?
I think very much so.
Yeah, so this is place for grade one, which is like 7-year-olds. So, what part of it, what do you think? What emotional development is happening here? I'd like you to write in the chat box. What kind of emotional development is it happening? If you see, this is the first time the story addresses child's uh, feelings when a
Yeah,
parent
Komal and
leaves for
Roma
work.
put family bonding, father-daughter bonding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are a lot of parents who are working, both of them. So the children see that they are not the only people here. So that was one thing, even as a child, when I used to read stories, I used to realize, no, it's not only me who's going through this. There are other people in the world who are going through the similar things. So this is one story where the child would accept that it's okay. Mama works, Papa works. So that's important, isn't it? So that's very, very important. There is a time awareness which is happening. There are daily activities. There is a routine, a rhythm which is taking place here. Cognitive development. Again, the concept of time is coming. Roja is noting the clock at various hours. So the children are learning time telling skills. There is a sequence which is happening. Social development, family, it plays such an important role. She's interacting with Appa, Tata, Pati, and even the vegetable vendor at one time. So all that is happening. There's a support system which the child is looking forward to. So if such stories, and of course, if you see, Roja's also doing a lot of activities alone, and there's a lot of self-reliance which is happening. So these are the kind of things which you don't really have to tell children when you're narrating the stories. It comes naturally to them. Again, when one is doing stories, it has to be repeated multiple times, to make their own. It's very important. Stories are extremely important part of children or even grown-ups. I mean, we live stories every single day. So it's very important. So the children should absorb, learn. These are things they might be getting more than this. We do not know. So it's important that good literature, good stories are introduced at an earlier age. And that goes beyond the curriculum if you look at it. Rather, this is part of the core curriculum. I'll keep repeating this because I'm so fascinated by what was said the other day. So, yes, uh, going to core curriculum, it comes to how do various education or philosophy, C, stories. So if you look at Steiner education and how the Steiner education aligns books with development stages, the Waldorf. So here, Steiner education believes that stories should mirror child's inner growth. There's a lot of emphasis on imagination, child's inner self, especially in the earlier age from 0 to 7. Although physically there's a physical growth happening, but the child is also coming into her own at this age. So what is important is 0 to 7, Steiner, they introduce fairy tales. They are very archetypal heroes, villains, helpers, and very clear moral lessons. So there's no ambiguity there. There's no complexity there. The ugly duckling, Jack and the beanstalk, the gigantic turnip. So there are no confusion there for the children. This is good, this is bad. Even entire Grimm's fairy tales, absolutely 0 to 7. Now, what happens around 7 to 14 is that children start having complex emotions. The emotional growth starts. So now the stories are chosen around that. Here, children get to explore complex ideas like choices, consequences, virtues. Aesop's tales are introduced. The boy who cried wolf. So there's a specific consequence. So if you do this, this would happen. So middle school 7 to 14, that is what is introduced. Going forward, now when it comes to 14 to 21, mm, there's a lot of logical understanding which is built between 14. There's complexity. We need to understand the world better, right? So that is the time the mythologies, the epics, and the philosophical tales are introduced to children. It not just develops critical thinking, but also leads to moral reasoning. Mahabharata, Ramayana, Iliad. So these are the kind of stories or texts which can be introduced to children at that age. So this is as far as Steiner is concerned. But if you look at Waldorf education, as I said, there's a lot of emphasis on nurturing imagination. So if they do storytelling, it's done in a very calm way. So you do it in an extremely calm way. It's not like one is shouting or doing. And the children are allowed or encouraged to imagine. So they use a lot of props. I have some puppets out here which I wanted to share. So if you see, this is a boy here, and then there's this girl here. And if you see, there are no facial features. I don't know if one can see.
If you just hold
Cal,
it in front of your face, Sonia, we can see
okay,
both.
okay,
Yes, that's fine.
okay. So if you see, that's a boy and that's
Yeah.
a girl. And if there are no, these were handmade at the time, and there are no features. So when you are using a girl or a boy, the children, or by themselves, they imagine whether the child was smiling, how the child looks. So it's the child's imagination at work. So that's how Steiner works. So there's a lot of rhythmical elements in the stories there. Again, the emphasis is on inner child, inner growth of child. It integrates with emotional, cognitive, and moral development. And it's also self discovery to understand who you are, the kind of person you are. So that's what Steiner comes from. Moving beyond is Montessori. Montessori, 0 to 6 years, is the age of exploration through daily life. So, if Montessori education is all about everyday activities, routines, so one can do stories around that. It can be cooking with mama, visit to the park. So, all that is extremely Montessori. Then the development goals here are cognitive, vocabulary building, sequencing is happening. It creates a sense of security through familiar routines. That is true everywhere. Here we are talking about routines. Even Steiner talks about rhythms. So even with reading, if you're doing reading teachers in the classroom, then there has to be a routine to be followed. It's very important. So routines or rhythms are extremely important. Mm, it encourages imitation or real life tasks like cleaning, organizing, helping in the kitchen. So that's Montessori education for 0 to 6 years. Going forward, 7 to 12 is practical experiences, the real world community roles, basics of science and nature. So the stone soup story or the story of Ferdinand, where we are talking about emotions, where we are talking about Ferdinand doesn't like to fight. So he likes to just smell. He's a bull. So those are the kind of stories where we are talking about practical experiences. Again, it cognitively enhances observation, understanding. There's a cause and effect relationship, empathy for community roles, animals. Again, hands on learning, gardening, crafting, observing nature. So that's part of Montessori education for 7 to 12. It starts getting complex, like in Steiner in 12 to 18. There's a lot of critical thinking happening. Children can be introduced to readings where it includes history, science, society, story of a river, the garden. So there are a lot of stories out there. Uh, Children start to connect the abstract concepts and make it tangible. Uh, they understand cultural nuances and the natural systems. Uh, Here, children can again start doing their research and model building. Any questions so far, Carl? Is it going fine?
Yeah, it's fine. There were a couple that came in, but you addressed them as you were going on, so you don't have
Right,
to
right.
highlight
Because
those.
I'm going to another story, which is part of our reader series.
Oh,
It's called, I'm just going to surpass this. It's called Emperor's New Clothes.
oh, yes.
So, how many of you have read Emperor's New Clothes or heard of it? Yes, yes, quite a few.
Yes, there's a few.
Okay. So for people who haven't heard it, this is an extremely abridged version. This is now how it is in the reader because we don't have time. I'm just going to read it and you can read it along with me silently, maybe. So it goes like, once upon a time, there was an emperor whose only interest in life was to dress up in fashionable clothes. He kept changing his clothes so that people could admire him. Once, two thieves decided to teach him a lesson. They told the emperor that they were very fine tailors and could sew a lovely new suit for him. It would be so light and fine that it would seem invisible. Only those who were stupid or foolish could not see it. The emperor was very excited and ordered the new tailors to begin their work. One day, the king asked the prime minister to go and see how much work the two tailors had done. He saw the two men moving scissors in the air, but could not see any clothes. He kept quiet for fear of being called stupid, foolish, and ignorant. Instead, he praised the fabric and said it was marvelous. Finally, the emperor's new dress was ready. He could see nothing, but he too did not want to appear stupid. He admired the dress and thanked the tailors. He was asked to parade down the street for all to see the new clothes. The emperor paraded down the main street. The people could only see a naked emperor, but no one admitted it for fear of being thought stupid, foolish. They foolishly praised the invisible fabric and the colors. The emperor was very happy. At last, a child cried out, "The emperor is shouted. Soon, everyone began to murmur the same thing. And very soon, everyone shouted, "The emperor is not wearing anything." The emperor realized the truth, but preferred to believe that his people were foolish. That's just a take on the story. Did you like the story?
I think so. Lots of positive comments. And by the way, it can be done in different grades. A few people have put it's done in different grades. So it depends if you have an abridged version, the full version, and variations on it.
So this story is part of readers, and this is a very abridged version just for this workshop,
Mm.
to be honest. If you want to read the entire, you'll have to go to the readers. And that will be like fantastic. But again, there are underlying messages or thoughts or skills which are developed through this story. Can you point out some? For example, it encourages independent thinking. There is this child who's thinking, I can connect it back to Montessori connection, where uh, it encourages children to think independently. So here is a child who doesn't get intimidated by the adults and state things as is. So that's one. Value of truth and honesty, that comes across so well, that a child who stands for himself and takes a moral stand and has the courage to say what is at that point in time. Observation and reality based learning. So again, if I go back to Montessori connection, it actually emphasizes that there is reality based learning in early years, encouraging children to observe and understand the world as is, which is that being led by fantasy or external influence. Then there's child's perspective and voice, which comes out very strongly. Freedom within limits. Okay, so there is responsibility, and you can only, encourage children to act within societal norms, but also to question and innovate when necessary. So these are the kind of stories which can lend themselves to many things. And of course, there is a critical thinking happening, which one can see through and through this story, isn't it? Yeah, trust your own judgment, one of them is saying, and analyze and draw conclusion. Correct. So it comes across very well through stories like these. The children have to be kept telling, see, what we are doing is through these stories, we are building life skills in children. So that's very important, that reading becomes extremely important. We come to progressive education. Now, when we talk about progressive education, uh, it values literature that challenges norms, encourages inclusivity and critical thinking. Some of the books would be The Giving Tree, I just mentioned, The Tale of Two Cities, Lorax, Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who. So there is a dilemma, there are multiple perspectives. Some of them have very ambiguous endings, and children learn to reflect and think for themselves. So these are the stories you can introduce for critical thinking. Then there's a diverse perspective. Aesop's fable, of course, is there. Each kindness is a story where there's this poor girl who joins a school and children don't treat her well because she's not wearing expensive clothes, or even her clothes are very old. And and one fine day she just stops coming, and which then the teacher brings up, a little water, and she throws a stone and says that, see, if you do kindness, it's like a ripple effect. So there are a lot of things which happen. So each kindness is a very good story for especially 7 to 12 year olds, for 7 to 12 years olds. So there are stories and books galore. So I'm just trying, kind of touching upon some of the stories, familiar stories. Any questions so far? All good?
Yeah, no, nothing that we can cover at
Right.
the moment.
So going back, the next is mainstream approach, which focuses on literacy, comprehension, graded reading levels. So here, these are graded readers. Oxford Reading Tree or Dr. Seuss books are graded. Then popular fiction like The Diary of Wimpy Kid or Magic Tree House for 7 to 12-year-olds. They are very familiar with this. I'm sure a lot of your children would be reading these books in school. Children love Diary of Wimpy Kid. They come to my house, they are reading this. Magic Tree House is a beautiful series. Then, of course, stories that align with academic goals like historical fiction for social studies or science themed books for STEM learning. So this is as far as different kind of philosophy. But if you look at Burlington literature readers, you will see it's like amalgamation of all kinds of books here. There are stories which stimulate imagination, which comes from Steiner's, anchor understanding in reality, Montessori, broaden worldviews, progressive, and develop foundational skills when it comes to mainstream. So you got to explore these books to see how the readers are. Some of the stories I can mention is, for example, for grade 3, we have Fast Food Fatima. And then I have been part of the selections. So I have selected quite a few of the stories here. Santhal, there are a lot of Santhal folk tales from India. Then there's story of Ali Kogya, Kabuliwala, which is written by Rabindranath Tagore. Fir Tree, which is written by Hans Christian Andersen. And they are very well placed uh, around the age group. I'm going to talk about it. Then there's Mark Twain essay, As You Like It, Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. There are stories, George Orwell. So it's a very good mix and genre of stories. It's not just stories. There are some essays. There are some poetries. So it's like a nice happy mix, which will absolutely complement in a classroom with everything else also. So that's one. Uh, this is what is very important, how to select book, age appropriate. So if you see infants and toddlers 0 to 3 is board books with minimal text, high contrast and sensory elements like textures or flaps. So that's important because children are fascinated by color at this age. Then 3 to 5, there is a lot of repetitive language. Because the more you repeat, the more the child learns the language, the vocabulary comes easily. And we all love rhymes, we all like repetition, right? So that's important. Then, if we go to early readers, there are short chapters, very short stories, one theme, no complexity, very relatable characters from around us, very straightforward. They begin with your humor or maybe have a moral lesson here and there. Then, when we look at 9 to 12, the plot becomes a little complex. Now, as I said, that this is the time when emotions are growing, they are forming friendships. So there's a lot of complexity when it comes to emotions. So friendship, self-discovery, courage. So these are the kind of topics which are taken care of in 9 to 12. And then, of course, 13 plus is identity, relationships, ethical dilemmas. So, those are the kind of things which children can explore when it goes to higher classes.
Sonia, maybe we could just pick up on one question that Bhagya
Yes, of
Lakshmi
course.
sent in because it relates to probably the last point you've just shown.
Mhm.
And the person's asking, should we select culturally appropriate stories or all stories?
Could you just repeat one
Yeah,
more time?
should we just select culturally appropriate stories, or should we give
Um,
a wide berth and choose from any stories?
Absolutely. It has to be from, lot of different kinds of stories. So the more you expose your children, that's why if you look at it, so there are cultural stories, but then there are stories from different other backgrounds also, right? So it has to be, another thing is when it comes to children, they have their own preferences, right?
Mm.
So we have to keep that in mind while selecting stories. What is it that interests them? For example, I have a child who's interested in sports. So this child is going to pick up a sports story. I mean, that's like a very obvious. Yesterday
And I
I
think
had a
that actually, to interrupt, I think that answers. I think Manda Kavita asked a question about what should be followed to create interest in children to read stories, and you've just mentioned something that they're interested in. We should actually give that sort of story or that genre to that child if they're interested in sport. Give something related to that.
I agree with you because yesterday I had this child who's in grade three, grade eight, and this kid was interested in reading Rich Dad and Poor Dad. And this was like a financial story. And he gave me a lowdown on how to how stocks work, how, and it was very interesting because there were a lot of things I was not aware of. And here is a 13-year-old teaching me about that. And he actually, we were looking at grammar components in that book at the time because I was looking at the cognitive development. But in the process, I learned a lot of things. Similarly, I
Mm.
have a child who's interested in music. So what we do is we read biographies of a lot of musicians there. So please, when you are, you should know your children, right? So it's very important that you choose stories which fascinate your children because that is the interest. So if they are interested in something, they are going to fall for other things also. So it's
Yeah,
very important.
yeah, and I think that answers a couple of points Naz Hanif made about when you start a new story, how can you keep them involved and avoid distractions and to imbibe the reading habit. I think it all depends on what you choose, which is what you're doing here. The criteria for
Right,
selecting books, if you get that right, I think it goes a long way towards
right,
actually maintaining that interest for them. Anyway,
absolutely.
carry on. We can pick up the other
Right,
questions towards the end.
right. Again, it's very important. Please do select books which there are a lot of books, right? So you got to be careful, like everything else. So, um, engaging rhythmic text, captivating attention, especially for younger children. Dialogues, descriptions, they help children visualize and connect with the story. Again, this is more for the younger children there. Yeah, do not overly simplify or for older children, uh, they might not enjoy it right at the time. So those are the kind of things one needs to kind of look at. um, so you got to look at what is it, it comes to the same thing what you are asking, what is it that holds your children. So it's very important the kind of stories you choose. You need to know your children's interests in life. And then, of course, from there, it can, if a child is interested in space, then the stories are going to be around space. And sometimes it just kind of leads to many more interesting things. I remember reading the Da Vinci Code, and then I went and explored the entire architecture and started reading about France and stuff like that. So now I know a lot of things by heart without actually going there. These are the kind of things which leads on to many other things as you go. So that's what is interesting about stories. I remember reading a lot of stories which were around vineyards. So now I know a lot of things about Italy without really visiting Italy for the matter. Of course, these are the kind of things that we were exposed to at that point in time. So that's what goes. Then coming to stories, empathy, it's extremely, in today's time, empathy is something which is really required. We need to highlight kindness and understanding. And empathy is not just like, you need to understand other people's perspective. It's not like my way or the highway. So that's something which can come in a very interesting way through the stories, because you are character analyzing different characters in a story, especially in older children. Resilience, how children overcome challenges. I'm also giving you, if you see, there are a lot of story names out there, which I have read, and I've just decided, put it against them. Wonder is a beautiful book. Then creativity and curiosity. So it's very important that to spark imagination and curiosity about the world around. So these are very important things. Criteria for selecting books. Again, it comes to what you've been like wanting to know. Diversity and representation is very important. So the protagonist has to be from various ethnicities, abilities, and family structures. Unfortunately, right now, what's happening, like we had a writing competition, pan India, and most of the characters, I was part of the jury, and most of the characters had names which were not Indian at all. Because unfortunately, we are reading a lot of text which is not in India, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing about wrong in that, but we should also be exploring Indian culture, and there's so much here. So there has to be a good balance about stories from Northeast, like I mentioned, Santali stories are there, and stories from down south or wherever. So it's very important that children also understand where we come from. That's our identity, after all. So that's very important. Stories written by authors from diverse backgrounds for authentic representation. Very important. Um, for example, the story of Ferdinand, of course, is based in Spain. So it talks about bullfighting and all, and it can actually start a whole debate on how, good is bullfighting. So there's a lot of things which can lead to many debates after this. And then when we could talk about the giving tree, it talks about environment and how selfish have we become that we keep taking and there's nothing to. So those are very sensitive, sensitizing issues when it comes to, stories. Uh, Going forward, clear, engaging visuals that complement the text. It's very illustrations are so important. I mean, I'm fascinated by some books just because of the illustrations, because they speak to you. They have their own language. So if you can get stories or books which have fabulous illustrations, nothing like it. They tell their own story, which goes beyond the text written. Um, Textures convey emotions and context. So illustrations are very important, I feel. Sometimes, I mean, they speak volumes actually. So just go for stories which are good illustrated, even for graphic stories for adults, 11, 12-year-old. There are a lot of graphic stories which are around, and they tell beautiful stories there. And a lot of them are from India also. So if you go look for it, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think
Mm.
that answers the question that Bhagya Lakshmi put up about how to encourage preschoolers and get them involved. I think illustrations are key, and the visual aspect of it at that young age. So I hope we've addressed
Absolutely.
that one.
Absolutely. Okay. Then we come to strategies for teachers to make stories fun and education. Early childhood, use props and puppets. Absolutely important. Okay. Incorporate repetition and rhymes. Encourage role playing. When I was a teacher, I was a pre-primary teacher to begin with. And every time I used to read a story, there was somebody acting it out with me. And it just became, and then of course some children are kinesthetic learners, so it just became a very interesting activity that okay, today is going to be my chance, and it develops listening skills. Somebody said reading stories. So yes, in that manner, it does develop listening skills. So you become active listeners there. Now, add sensory elements when you are telling stories, especially for youngers. Senses, very important. Sour. They don't understand what sour is. Maybe just show them what sour is. Sometimes is a good idea, or bitter is. So it's interesting. It adds element to the stories there. When it comes to 6 to 8, ask questions, ask them to think, ask them to ask questions. What will happen next? What do you think is the title all about? What do you think is the story going to be all about? It becomes very interesting. Then there can be a lot of illustration based activities. I do that a lot with 6 to 8. It leads to cognitive development, language learning, vocabulary. What's happening in the picture? What are these people doing? So there's a lot of vocabulary which takes place at that time. Also connected to real life. There's this Topsy and Tim series which talks about a trip in the airplane and a train. So when I went, I read that, and when my children went, so we experienced the whole process again. So it was Montessori way of doing, but it was connected to real life at the time. Uh, Introduce simple problem solving questions. What would happen next? So, what you're doing is building life skills. It's not just now, it's for good, forever. A middle elementary, encourage group discussions, have group discussions around stories. When I was in school, we used to read a story, we were asked to write a summary at the time. So use writing prompts, incorporate hands-on activities that might be just interviewing people. That can be an experiential thing. Turn stories into mini plays. Becomes very interesting. Upper elementary 10 to 12, debate key issues, explore different endings. I did introduce STEM connection through a story, incorporate STEM connections. So that is something which is very, again, stories stick to you. So that's very important. You'll never forget a story which you heard as a kid. And it'll just keep coming back as you grow older. That's what I am experiencing in my, times. Another thing, adolescents discuss complex themes, encourage creative projects, connect to historical or cultural contexts, ask them to journal. So all that becomes extremely important. Finally, do have story time rituals. If it allows you, have dear period. Very important. Drop everything and read. It's such an important thing because, or ask parents to kind of, come and do this. Have reading challenges. How many books have you read this month? Okay, let's discuss it. At least one book. Book discussions, especially in middle school, have book discussions, perspectives, buddy reading. Ask older children to go to smaller classes and read them a story. So that's buddy reading. Debates on books. That's beautifully, critically analyze books, connect to real world issues. I was doing Macbeth, and then we related it to the politics and the music scene and the rap scene. And it was fantastic. This was a grade 11, 12 child from American school. And it was fantastic that we could pick up Macbeth and relate it to today's world issues. So it becomes real for them. Macbeth doesn't, exist in Shakespearean time. It becomes now. So those are the kind of things you'll have to make. So do not make it just something to be read or studied. It's more than that. It's real time. That's very important. So that's all as of now. I'm ready to take any questions there.
I think you've actually answered the questions, Sonia, because the later ones that came in was about how can we encourage reading habits for teenagers.
Mhm.
How can we actually be creative without giving a title? So I think you've given lots of examples there. So I think you've covered all the questions. So once again, Sonia, thank you for such an enlightening session. Hopefully, teachers, you can take that on board. And maybe when you go back to your school, think about when you're doing your reading lists beyond the curriculum, about what sort of books and material that you can choose for different age groups. So thanks once again, Sonia. I think we
Thank you.
can
Thank you
close the
so much.
webinar there. And you can tell from the comments, there's a lot of positivity about what you've covered today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cal. Thank you.